Southland economic debate. I'll be your chairman slash facilitator slash ringmaster for this evening. My name's Darren Ludlow, and it's a pleasure to see so many people who care for a start and have given up their time, or either that or you've got lost on your way to the James Hargis leaving function. But I think if there are any ex-Hargis students, you may have left a year or two previous. We've got a few special guests here that I'll get along and introduce in just a moment. But first, for the wherefores and whyfores and why we're all here this evening, would you please welcome the organiser tonight, Anna Huffstutler.
Hello and welcome. On behalf of the Southland branch of the Council of Trade Unions, I'd like to thank our panel for recognising the importance of the discussion by attending. We are sorely disappointed, even though we went to great efforts, that the National Government passed up the opportunity to come. We hope this discussion will bring forward practical and creative ideas to improve what is a rather bleak outlook for our region. Respected local businessman Ken Richardson and political commentator Rod Oram, among others, have publicly expressed their concerns about our region's economy. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the following local businesses: the Seriously Good Chocolate Company, Essential Resources, Venture Southland, Invercargill Breweries and Backcountry Foods for generously donating the gift baskets for our out-of-town guests. Please remember our fantastic local businesses when you're doing your Christmas shopping this year. Last but by no means least, I'd like to thank our Chair, Darren Ludlow, for donating his time and his expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Well, what's it all about? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to realise that things are tough. It's not just here. There is a global financial crisis going on. It does affect the entire world. But there have been things that have happened in the South over the past, 18 months to 2 years that are just a real mounting concern. You know, it started with redundancies within government departments. It's moved on to cutbacks in small enterprise. Naturally enough, there's the issue with regards to the smelter and what's going to happen here. We've seen redundancies and hours being reduced for people who are working in the meat industry. It's a real concern. And you see it when you walk up any street at the moment and you talk to businessmen and you say, you know, how are things? And they're finding it tough. And doing the same old's just not going to be the answer. And I'm not sure what answer we'll find tonight, but I think we'll get some suggestions, some perspectives, and maybe some consensus. All set for me? Some consensus on what could be done on the way forward. Now, it's a real pleasure to have a panel with this kind of oomph to join us to present their opinions. And what will happen, each of the panellists will have a chance to come up and make 2 minutes is the magic figure tonight, and there'll be a bell at 90 seconds, panellists, and another one at 2 minutes, to make an introductory statement. After that, there are 5 prepared questions that each of the candidates have already received and have a chance to provide an answer to. I'll ask the question and ask each of the candidates to come up and give their answers. And then, as time allows, hopefully we will also have the chance to take some questions from the floor. Not too many, because if you go 5 times 2, you can realise it doesn't take too long to start chewing through your Friday evening. But I would ask you that if you're going to put a question, if you could make sure that it's relevant to all the panellists, something that everybody could.
Guests. It is on. Oh, it's just me that can't hear it. Sorry, I've got a head cold at the moment, so it's quite good. I can't hear myself speak, but I can't hear anyone else speaking either. I suppose in local terms, I think what has decimated all of regional New Zealand has been the free market and the impact it's had in terms of the development of Auckland. Auckland's become this huge whirlpool. It's already a third of New Zealand's population has been sucked in. It draws in all the resources, it draws in all the people, and it's just going on and on. It's out of control. It'll be 40% of New Zealand's population in another 10 years. It grows by the size of Timaru every year, and the country can't cope with that lopsided form of development. Provincial cities are becoming ghost towns. Cass, the city in Arthur's Pass, has got one resident now. It used to be a thriving town. I think the only thing that saved us from population decimation has been, one, education. The zero fee scheme was brilliant. It brings $28 million a year into the local economy. Thousands of students have arrived from all over the world, and tutors as well. I think the arrival of the cows was a great boost for us. I know we went from 50,000 cows when I was here in 1993 to 500,000 cows today. I know they poo in the rivers and that, but I mean so do freedom campers, you know, you've got to keep things in perspective. And in terms of the local economy and workshops and engineering shops, it has been a boost. And the last thing I believe is the events industry and the infrastructure that goes around that. So we had the biggest cycling tournament in New Zealand's history with the under-21 world champs, and we needed to build a velodrome, of course, so we couldn't host events like that. And you look right through, to me, events are just an industry. They're like a factory, but they don't produce cans or...
And I'll be the voice in your ear now, Your Worship.
Oh, is that 2 minutes?
Yep, sorry.
Oh, okay. So those are the three most positive aspects of our local economy.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Look, Your Worship, parliamentary colleagues, Peter, and the people of Southland, it's nice to be back. I have a bit of an affection for this place, given that I've got two grandparents buried in a local graveyard who worked at Miller's Bakehouse, and two generations, not including me, of Cosgroves played A-grade Southland rugby down here. So I do have an affection for this place. Look, tonight is an interesting discussion because... Oh, okay. Tonight's going to be an interesting discussion because I think is that better? Yes. Okay. Because I think what you're going to hear, and I don't want to speak for other political parties, but you do have a group of individuals here who believe that government should not be a passive observer on the sidelines of our economy as it hits the rocks, or as it is hitting the rocks, but actually become involved, be hands-on and make some changes. And whether those changes are around not selling SOEs, I say to you tonight, if you want to contribute and try and stop the movement on the smelter, one of the biggest things the government could do is simply announce it wasn't going to sell Meridian Energy. Because we know that Rio Tinto, I'm an ex-miner from Australia, when I worked over there, we know Rio Tinto is leveraging what it can because of that sale. So I think what you're going to hear tonight is some ideas from us about, I believe, that the government should be intervening on various issues, big picture issues in our economy. I was standing at the restaurant, I heard somebody say, don't want to hear about interest rates, don't want to hear about exchange rates, we're too small a country. We need, some practical effects down here was the sort of comments some people were making. Well, you are going to hear a bit about that today because the problems that you're experiencing in Invercargill and in Southland, the hollowing out of skills, lower wages, the hollowing out of the manufacturing sector, these are problems which are being replicated right across our communities and right across New Zealand. And there are some big picture issues that if we don't actually move on and change tack on, these problems will never be solved. In fact, 100 workers being made redundant will turn into many, many hundreds. And I note that there's 1,000 people or more out of this province which have disappeared to the land of glory over to Australia. So I think you're going to hear some comments tonight about what we should do to try and positively solve some of these problems, because as I say, the problems in Invercargill and Southland are the problems in New Zealand. Cheers.
Thank you, Clayton. I'll get you to pass the magic.
Kia ora tātou, everybody. Look, it's great to be here, and I'd like to acknowledge Anna and Union Southland from the Council of Trade Unions for organising this. The CTU's got 37 affiliates with 350,000 workers in them, and we stand for decent jobs, a living wage, safety at work, and workers having a say. And our big concerns at the moment, obviously, are about massively high unemployment, 294,000 jobless, 113,000 people looking for additional hours of work, 54,000 people gone to Australia in the last year. Inequality. Being in a job these days doesn't necessarily mean that you're on a good income. 40% of children in poverty live in households where there is a full-time earner. And so those are some of our major concerns. And this government, well, this stripe of government always does at least 5 things. One of them is to privatise, another is to reduce the size of government, cut down on public services, a third one is to change the tax system in favour of the wealthy, a fourth one is to attack beneficiaries, and a fifth one is to have a go at workers and unions. So that's what we're up against, even with the global financial crisis to boot. They still plough on with that. So tonight, what I'm looking forward to hearing from you about, but also from the other speakers, is how can there be a greater level of decent jobs in this community where people have got security and certainty and can get on with their lives in that knowledge, knowing that there's opportunities for skill development in the community. What are the broader economic issues for the region, and what does a regional development plan look like, and what are some of the options? Kia ora tātou.
Thank you very much, Pete.
Ladies and gentlemen, you don't get it, and that's why I don't get it. You have 3% of the country's population. You're producing about up towards 80% of the country's exports, bringing back wealth from abroad to the family New Zealand back home, and yet you've got a provincial financial crisis.
Thank you.
I don't get it. Now, where's your local MP? Well, the man that was on the plane with me this morning said now and again goes to Dipton. Well, he's not here either. But what I don't get is that you're all sitting there smiling. And I thought you'd be filled with rage because this country has electorates like Auckland and Wellington Central, which are the wealthiest in the country and don't export anything at all. And exports is critical to us because unless we export, this country dies. We're an export-dependent nation. So all I can suggest that we, sometime tonight, sort out a few things you need to get enraged about, and then tell your neighbour to do something about it because, frankly, if you're going to keep on voting for people who don't give a damn about you, you won't get a change at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So my people are from Greytown, from the Wairarapa, and from Whanganui River up in Jerusalem. So I live in Dunedin with my husband and my daughter, except she's just left home. So, it's a bit sad, but it's all right. Thank you for this chance to come and speak with you today about this issue. I guess I would say to you, one of the 3 issues that the Green Party campaigned on in the last election was kids, rivers, and jobs. Jobs. Because jobs was always going to be the major issue after the recession. How to protect the jobs that we have already and how to make sure we develop more jobs in more places and more kinds of technologies and new kinds of areas so that we were able to make sure there's work, dignified, well-paid, decent work for our families and for our kids. That has always been the challenge, especially in the time of a recession. It's also been the area where the government has had its greatest failures. 40,000 manufacturing jobs already lost to this country and more going all the time. Thousands of our people, our kids often leaving the country for jobs elsewhere. So protecting jobs and building more jobs is our priority. I want to say that one thing I know about Southland, having spent a lot of time in Dunedin and spending time down here with you, is that Southland is a highly resilient, highly innovative region. You know, you've got SIT, you have amazing sports facilities with the Velodrome and other things. The space tracking station, I mean, that's quite out of it really. The Southland Building Society, what you do here is you build with the strengths and the resources that you have. And although tonight we are here to talk about how to protect the jobs at Tiwai, and that is our commitment to find those solutions and discuss them with you, I want to remind you that you have all of the strength and resilience to deal with it if it doesn't go exactly as we hope. And I think sharing those ideas tonight is what we
tonight will be answering is, what would you do to support the threatened TY workers? First of all, Your Worship.
Sell it to the Chinese. I reckon they're the only country in the world that are powerful enough. I know you hate them because of the Crayford farms and all that, but at the end of the day, they're a communist, capitalist country, and they've got wealth and power and youth, and they're going to be a big part of our future, whether we like it or not. There's two companies, I went over there a couple of months ago, who were really keen to buy it. I've been in touch with the smelter people, and I can't seem to get a reply out of them. So, I don't know, they say it's for sale, but when you bring customers along ready to buy it, you don't hear anything from them. So I don't know what sort of games are being played at the moment.
Thank you, Your Worship. So that's the question. What would you do to support the threatened TY workers? Clayton Cosgrove.
Well, firstly, as I said, we know that Rio Tinto is bending Meridian over a barrel and leveraging to a great extent the situation which exists, because the government has said it's for sale. And we know that if they lose that contract and the government moves on the sale, the value of that company will go down. So what TY are doing and Rio are doing is simple commercial enterprise, and that is they're putting in as much leverage as they can. What do you do to stop it? Well, as I said to you in the opening speech, you stop the sale, you pull the pin. The State-Owned Enterprises Minister, I was Associate Minister of Finance, Michael Cullen for State-Owned Enterprises. You walk in and you say, it's off, it's too important. That smelter contributes, what, $460 million per annum in the regional economy, 700 jobs, 3,000 ancillary jobs, contractors, etc. It is too important. Therefore, we're not going to sell Meridian. That's the first thing you do. The second thing is, if it does go south, and God forbid if it does, then what do you do with those workers? Well, the big fear I have is those skilled workers will just disappear straight over to Brisbane, to Perth, straight across the ditch. The question is, do you engage in retraining? Of course you do. Do you partner with the local authority here, as your local authority has done, I think, as an example in New Zealand, and work in partnership to develop this local economy? A thing called the Local Government Act went through the other day. Effectively, Tim will tell you more than I, effectively what that does in theory is halt the ability of a local authority to engage in widespread economic development. That's one of the things it does. Now, I would argue that Tim and you guys and your community know better than a bureaucrat in Wellington what is best for you, where you can create jobs. He's talked about cows. Somebody told me these guys own a lotto shop and it's making money for the ratepayers. Doesn't matter. A bit of innovation. You guys know best how to develop this economy. But one of the key things if it does go south is we've actually got to do something the government doesn't believe in anymore, and that is go in and retrain and train these people and others, the 175,000 unemployed we have in this country, retrain them, give them some skills so that they can move in to solid jobs. It's two sides, job creation and training. But I'll just come back to it. If the government wanted to protect TY smelter, Tony Ryle and Bill English would go into the cabinet and say, Meridian is not for sale.
Thank you, Clayton. Same question now.
Tindo. We know there's issues about electricity prices, global price for aluminium, and also exchange rate. But what we also know is this problem is not of the workers making. There's nothing about their skills, their productivity, their effort that is at the heart of this problem. And the flow-on effects, that means that there's actually more like 3,200 jobs at stake, is 10% of your regional economy. How could any government stand by and let this uncertainty drag on and drag on? You know, that is not just bad economic management, it's callous. So the first thing is the government has to take ownership of this problem and say it will sort it, it will make sure there is a solution to this impasse. Because the uncertainty is as bad as anything else and will be affecting your regional economy right now. So first of all, there needs to be some pressure put on Meridian, whether it is brickmanship by the company, whether it's a cyclical issue, whether it's actually a deeply structural issue, as Rod Oram and others have argued, in terms of the economics around the smelter. Regardless of that, you don't walk away from 3,200 jobs. You get in and you support it, and then the longer term issues can be addressed. And there's a question later this evening when we'll talk about some of those options. You know, in Wellington it's all been a bit of a flurry about the hobbits recently. And, you know, the government did manage to find $95 million for those 3,000 jobs. 95 million. So, you know, that's the situation. What will the CTU do? Well, we will continue to support the campaign and we'll increase momentum around it. It's got to be more than postcards, although that's welcome. It's got to build up as a campaign so it's seen as a major issue. We'll hold the government to account, and I agree with Clayton. We've got to get that referendum over the line and stop the asset sales.
Thank you, Peter. Mr. Peters.
Well, can I suggest that you first of all need a long-term sustainable solution? That means you've got to deal to the high exchange rate. Our exchange rate at the moment is about 25, 28% overvalued. And it's damaging every provincial economy and every exporter because you're not getting, cent by cent, what you should be getting. So if you've got an exchange rate run for the Queen Street the property developer or paper shuffler or a speculator or somebody sitting in Geneva or Washington or somewhere else playing against your currency, and they are, because it's the 7th most traded currency in the world, then a place like Tiwai Point and your farming community and your fishermen haven't got a hope in Hades. If it carries on, it'll get to 85 cents very soon, and then what will people do? So that's number one, you deal to it. We had a Reserve Bank bill to change all that. It got beaten by just one vote about 6 weeks ago. But we'll be back next year and do the same thing again, because sooner or later people will come to their senses. The second thing is you've got to have to cancel the asset sales, because this is an outfit supplied by that you own. And Manapuri was built specifically to provide this outfit for 10,000 years of sustainable power based on turning water into money through Tiwai Point. And he used to work underground at Manapuri, I know that. In fact, I know a bit about it myself because I worked underground in the snowy mountains. You probably don't believe that, but it's fact. And it's dangerous. Very dangerous job. So I can understand what he was saying when he wrote an article recently about it. Now the third thing is, you're going to have to restore the power price competitive advantage that we've always had as a country until these guys, and Max Bradford particularly recall, decided that he knew better, and he said he would flatten the power prices out. They've become plateaued, he said, and his plateau, when he finished his reforms, looked like this. Right through the roof. So I think the question of pricing here is not too difficult. And one last thing, if they can't make a go of it, and they don't think it's economic, then why can't the workers make a go of it, backed by the New Zealand people through the super fund?
Tiwai Workers, Green Party co-leader, Materia Ture.
Kia ora. Alright, so politically we'll do what we usually do, which is fighting for a level playing field. So as Peter said, some industries are being supported by this government and some are being completely ignored. They are picking winners, and it means that people, particularly out in the regions, are losing workers. What happened with Hillside? They chose not to invest that $500 million, and now Hillside Workshop is being sold as well. They are picking winners, and we are fighting for a level playing field for government support for industry across the country. We need to protect workers and workers when they are unemployed, and it's one reason why we fight so hard against the welfare reforms, because those reforms punish people because they don't have a job. People who don't have a job in this country don't have a job because this government has failed to provide an economic environment that means we protect the jobs we have and we develop new jobs as we need them. It is not the workers' fault, it is not the families' fault that families are sometimes dependent on a benefit, and they should never be punished for needing social support. But there's also ideas for what could happen. Jeanette Fitzsimons, you might have seen recently, had a very interesting proposal that yes, the government should take on Tiwai, if they're going to sell it, and there's no way of stopping that, take on Tiwai and manage a system of keeping it going, keeping up those lines that are able to be shut down over a planned way, be able to manage the energy needs both of New Zealanders as a whole during the winter high demand times by keeping the plant, shutting the plant down during those periods, but pumping up its production during those periods where there is lots of energy, keeping those jobs here. It's a very good proposal that would also help to keep energy prices down for families. At the same time, the plant continues to produce. At the same time, we continue to keep jobs here. Asset sales is critical, and there is the petition over here on the table as well. Please sign the petition to have a referenda on asset sales if you haven't already. It's absolutely critical we get that referenda up. And so those are the kinds of things that we would do in the short period of time I have to talk with you, Gilda.
Tonight that each of the panellists will have an opportunity to answer, and I guess it's quite appropriate that we should start off with His Worship, is what do you think the role of local government should be in creating and promoting industry in our region? Your Worship.
Thank you. Well, I think the first job we should do is ideas. We should be looking at bright, smart, new thinking, not our own ideas necessarily. And I've got to put out a little economic report here of an idea that came to me from a retired engineer. And the reason we've got TY and we got the Manapuri Power Project is because we drilled a hole through the Southern Alps, basically. The first one we drilled, we stuck the drill holes full of dynamite and blasted our way through, and 17 men got killed. But the second tunnel, we got a Swiss imported drill, like a dentist drill, and just drilled the hole through. And I think we should drill 10 holes through the Southern Alps. I reckon with global warming, the east side of the South Island is going to suffer drought and fires, and the west side is going to be flooded. And we should drill holes and put the water through so we can irrigate the farmlands of the east and generate electricity at the same time. Also push the new ideas of the film industry, the events industry I've talked about. I, like Muldoon's, think big industry. He went around all the provinces of New Zealand and built all sorts of things, and I've written about that in the paper as well. Steelworks at Waiuku, oil refinery at Whangarei, New Plymouth, the gas and oil industry, and that's what we need. Maybe we should call it Roosevelt's New Deal, but huge investment in provincial New Zealand to try and balance out what's happening in Auckland. The second thing we can do is land, and we've got a big land bank, and we've got all the requirements and regulations have been passed so that any industry can come into Invercargill and build. We've got 2,000 acres, and they don't need a resource consent or anything like that, so it helps precipitate industry, and of course endorse new industries like the biotechnology industry of my Auckland Island pigs. Thank you very much.
All those ideas that Tim talked about are quite probably garroted by the Local Government Act that just passed. There's a thing in the Local Government Act called the well-beings. It sounds a bit PC, I know. One of those well-beings, objectives if you like, was this, that it required local bodies to incorporate local economic factors in their decision making. And in essence what that meant is that government and local authorities would work in partnership, but it recognised the fact that your local authority and others around New Zealand had a critical role to play in the economic development of Southland. What the Local Government Act does, that the government's just passed, is it basically takes that responsibility away from Tim and the team here and makes it a central government responsibility. So those in Wellington will know better for you. What do we say? All the ideas that Tim's come up with and other local authorities, what should happen is that the government should work in partnership and be a facilitator with local authorities who are critical of the economic development. We have these things called economic development agencies, corporations, and Christchurch and others, all engendered out of local authorities, because you know what you need down here, and it should be the role of government to collaborate, to support the local people and the local authorities, and to mow down the roadblocks, economic, bureaucratic, to allow the local authorities in conjunction with the business community and the community as a whole to unleash the resources that are down here. So the Local Government Act that's just been passed does exactly the reverse. They know best in Wellington apparently what is best for you. That's not going to create jobs and create vibrancy, because every part of regional New Zealand is different, has different needs and different opportunities. So our view is that we need to partner, need to collaborate, need to work extremely closely to help unleash the energy and the economic benefit that can come out of regional New Zealand. Not simply as the Local Government Act says, we know best up there in Wellington, you'll do what you're told, and you will have no part development here. Doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Clayton. CTU perspective, Peter Conway.
I agree with Clayton that the recent changes to local government law does make it more difficult, but there is this huge amount that can be done. And for example, we can push a lot harder for procurement rules at a national level that require enforceable industry participation clauses in tender documents. Now, if that had been the case with the railway wagons, they'd be made in New Zealand, and they'd be, or a large part of them, and a lot of that work would be done at Hillside. A lot of work has been done. If you look at, for instance, Ganesh Nana's report that is available, he talks about forestry, manufacturing, education and horticulture. If you look at South Australia on the 25th of October this year, after a one-year process, they launched a very strong manufacturing strategy with buy-in from both sides of Parliament. And so, check it out, Tim. I mean, that's the sort of thing that gives an example of how on a regional basis, albeit in Australia, they're really starting to look at the sorts of things that can be done. Obviously, from a union perspective, we want to see local government supporting a living wage. And I agree with Winston, there's a relationship in trying to get savings into productive investment. We've been developing KiwiSaver and the Super Fund. What are the mechanisms that can be looked at to translate those building savings into productive investment? Now, I know Venture Southland with topiculture and all sorts of things have done a lot over recent years, but the thing about getting these ideas to implementation is it really requires political will, it requires buy-in from employers and education institutions and a wide range of people, and it needs investment. Now, I think you need to make sure the industry capability network associated with NZTE is down here on a regular basis working with you, and I think you need to get New Zealand Trade and Enterprise taking a lot more interest in this region. Make a lot of noise about this region and people will take more notice. Thanks a lot.
And now for the role in local government, creating, promoting industry in our region, Winston Peters.
Well, first of all, those four well-beings being removed was opposed by every council in this country. And there's got to be a few councils that are on the far right, surely, but every council unanimously opposed it. Now, you know, I can recall when this city, through its politic and its charging regime, had a dramatic change to the entrance of students into this part of the country. That seriously worked. I also recall a mayor down here saying we should have down here an international airport serving Australian tourism into the southern part of this country and the ski fields, and he was laughed out of town. It was only going to cost $600,000 back then, as I recall. Am I right? I think I am. $600,000. But you see, that sort of thing now would be precluded under this change because people like Nick Smith, you know Nick Smith, and the ACC debacle. You remember, don't you? Or Bill English, who's the #1 State House recipient in this country. You all know him, don't you? They've decided that they can't afford to let you have your say through your ratepayers, have the electing councillors. They'll have all the say themselves. Now, you've got to do something about it. But there are some good examples of many local councils trying to make things change. Otaronga is a classic example. Otaronga has got a tremendous partnership going between business and education, and all sorts of local body people are involved to the extent that they have no unemployment at all. And I know that there are issues down here as well, but I still come back to my point, and it's this. This should be the wealthiest province in the country. It is the biggest exporter per capita by miles. So what is wrong with you? When you go out and vote for those bozos, and then you're still happy about it.
Thank you, Winston.
Winston, he's always on message. Totally agree with you. Look, the role of local government, advocacy is obviously one, and you know, the council here and the regional council are strong advocates for this region. So have no fear that they're highly engaged in it, and that's excellent. One of the things that doesn't happen very often around the country, and certainly doesn't happen at a national level, is around economic planning for transition. So We talk a lot about a transition from a 19th century economy to a sustainable green economy, and all the different opportunities that comes out of that. But in order to do that, to make that move, there has to be a plan for transition, because otherwise you cause too much harm by just having things open and close, jobs come and go. Radical change is very damaging for communities, so a plan is needed. This government, and actually no government in my experience, has really committed to a genuine regional economic development plan that's focused on that transition. But this is something that local government can and I think should be doing, because otherwise the community is subject to the vagaries of the global financial circumstances of boom and bust, where you get big projects, think big projects like Tim's been talking about, that come and go, and when they go, they cause enormous harm because there's no plan for what will happen when that going is inevitable. Because that's what the boom and bust cycle is all about. So part of local government's responsibility, I think, is planning for that transition. The Bureau report has a lot of ideas about diversifying the economy here. And the council, and I would hope the council is engaged in what that diversification means, how they can be involved, what are the resources here that can be leveraged to help with that diversification. Because we do not want to keep seeing communities being subject to these kind of think big projects like TY that cause harm when in their best interest they bugger off and leave people hurting behind them. Thank you.
Question for this evening is, what would your party or organisation do to support the Southland economy and maintain jobs given the current international and local conditions? First up, Tim Shambold.
Well, I'm sorry, I still think drilling holes through the Southern Alps is a great idea, you know, I know.
Clayton
I don't
Cosgrove.
know how the hell we're supposed to compete with that.
Good luck.
Look, a couple of things. One, change the Reserve Bank Act. Why do you do that? Because instead of the Reserve Bank having this myopic obsession with inflation and price stability only, you've got to do what the Australians do and give them a wider brief so that they actually take account of a thing called instability and fluctuations in the exchange rate. Because of course what that does, a high exchange rate is killing our exports, point one. Second thing, you train people. Good old-fashioned thing called apprenticeship. We had a policy at the last election that said, we'll take the dole from that individual, give it to the building firm. The deal is you get that for 1 year, you've got to top it up with a few $100 a week, and you take Johnny off the dole and you train him as an apprentice. And that dole payment gets the employer over the first year's hump when Johnny's, you know, not a lot of skills, bit of a cost to the business, and then the employer bites the bullet for the salary for the rest of the 3 years. And you take that person within a year off the dole. We've got the world's biggest job creation scheme up the road in my province called Christchurch. Nobody's taking advantage of that. Secondly, you've actually got to have some pro-growth tax policy so that people are incentivised bluntly, and this is the truth, to invest in productive businesses which create jobs and create innovation. Thirdly, when we were in government, we had a thing which we'll bring back called a research and development tax credit. What did that do? It said where a business actually spent money on R&D, creating new products, new services, science, a lot of the stuff you guys do here in the dairy industry, then they got a bit of money back and they were incentivised to do it, and that created jobs. And the other point, which Peter touched on, is we need actually a New Zealand-centric procurement policy. Government departments spend $30 billion per annum on goods and services and infrastructure. A lot of that could be produced at world-class levels here in New Zealand if they had a view that that's what they would do. They would look at New Zealand in respect to procurement. All those things will create, maintain jobs and raise wages.
Perspective, Peter Conway.
Well, Tim, I used to listen to you in Auckland. You certainly haven't lost your sense of humour. But you appear to have developed some tunnel vision somewhere along the way. I think, obviously, I covered this a little bit before. I think there's major opportunities in a modern environment to look for joint venture opportunities where you have a stake as well as others do. It's not all foreign or all New Zealand or whatever, it's how you get those joint ventures together. So The major thing you need to do is look at the feasibility studies, whether it's around silica or other projects that are there, and look at what's going to get them to a stage of implementation. Because otherwise you waste a lot of money and resource on ideas that never come to fruition. I think Winston was right talking about the Dale Williams Otrahonga model. I know a lot in the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs have looked at that model, and is it exportable to other areas? They're trying it in Manukau at the moment. But essentially it's saying that no young person is left without attention for more than 2 weeks as to what their plans are. And if they're not in employment, education or training, then someone keeps an eye on them until that happens. They don't let anybody fall through the cracks. And so it's a simple thing. It requires some resources, and it requires employers support and a lot of attention. Training is just so vital, and I agree with what Clayton said about that. We are hugely under-investing in training. We're getting to the absurd scenario that we've got a massive unemployment, 175,000 household labour force survey, 294,000 if you include those discouraged. We've had 54,000 go to Australia, and we've got employers clamouring for migrants to come in here to do the jobs at low pay rates. So that kind of dynamic has to stop. And so some of the things that can be done, I'll give one idea because time is short. This government, the worst thing this government has done was the tax switch. It pushed up the cost of living by pushing up GST. It widened income inequality. It gave 90% of the tax cuts to those on the top 10% of incomes, and it widened the fiscal hole by around $1 billion. So why not take some of that back and create a jobs fund? Wouldn't take much of a tweak with that tax switch, which was such a disaster, to end up with a 500 million jobs fund. And that's the way you could start. In tough times, you see what priorities are. Jobs are priority, then that's where you have to put your money.
No pun intended. Now Winston Peters.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about an aspect to our economy which is manufacturing and business, where our competitors overseas can get 18 workers for the price we pay for one. All right? Then these ideologues say, well, obviously you cannot keep New Zealand business going because they're not competitive. But the one overseas that's paying for 18 workers for the price that we're paying for one doesn't have ACC, an expensive health system, doesn't care for the old people with a decent retirement scheme, doesn't have free medicine for under 6-year-olds, and all the other things which we take as being part of the New Zealand way of life. So what I'm saying is, before we go any further in this conversation, let's make up our mind that we will defend New Zealand manufacturing and businesses. We're gone. In the halcyon days when we were number 2 in the world, we had, in terms of GDP, our manufacturing was plus 30% of GDP. Now it's 30% and sliding, and still there's no action based on, well, we cannot be competitive. That's nonsense. Every Scandinavian country, and you'll notice that on the choice of the world where people want to live, in terms of the best places to live, the first 4 countries are all Scandinavian: Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Sweden. Came fourth, first, second, third, and fourth just the other day. Those are countries that defend their businesses, that don't find it impossible to use the word protection. In fact, some of them don't even belong to the European Union at all. And they're roaring along. And it's not just their oil. The biggest earner for Norway, which is 2.5 times better off in terms of income in their pocket every week than we are, is not oil, but fishing and fishing technology and products like that there. By far. So I give a lot of other answers. But first make up your mind that we are going to defend New Zealand businesses, New Zealand manufacturers, and New Zealand workers.
What would the Green Party do to support the Southland economy and maintain jobs given the current international and local conditions?
So I've talked already a bit about the sustainable green economy and making the transition and planning for that transition so that we protect communities and jobs in the process. And also about the Bill report and all the different opportunities that are here. One of the interesting ones that I was told in the briefing when I was coming here and preparing for this talk was around the idea of the silica plant and Venture Southland's investigation into that. Not only is that the kind of innovative idea that could be developed here. But it's high tech. It's part of the global green economy, which is worth multi-billions of dollars internationally, in which New Zealand, even if we just got a small slice of it, would be worth thousands of jobs here in this country. Manufacturing jobs, jobs for ordinary New Zealanders as well as for pointy-headed PhDs and those kinds of people. But also, it's one of those ideas too that builds satellite companies around it. So as again with Hillside, where there's lots of engineering firms that wrap around Hillside and take business to and from Hillside because of the way it operates. A big plant like that can do the same here with photovoltaics and microchip manufacturing. You know, these are the kinds of things that can happen. That's why we have to kind of free ourselves from this idea that the only resources we have are cows. They aren't the only resource we have. We have people, we have ideas, we have innovation, we have young people who are desperately asking for our confidence in them and our investment in them so that they can exploit those ideas. And you have all of that here in your economy, in your region. One thing I learned from the enormous success of the home insulation scheme that the Greens was involved with both with Labour and now with National, is that if you build an economic plan where you have government, local government, banks, industry, business, you have community organisations and families all with an investment in making it work, you build a very resilient scheme, a very resilient kind of economy. So we need to be looking at not just about government, although government has an important place to play in all of this, a critical place to play, but all of the ways that different parts of the economy, different parts of the community can intersect in that regional development. That's what makes it successful, that's what makes it resilient and innovative and local. Thank you.
The question for our panellists is, do you think the exchange rate for the New Zealand dollar is a problem for economic development and job creation? If you don't, I guess your answer will be short. If you do, what can we do about it? Tim Shambold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to open a bit of a time bank on this one because I don't know much about international economics, to be honest, and I think it's obvious to everyone that, yes, it is hurting New Zealand exports, our high New Zealand dollar. Everyone you talk to, Chamber of Commerce, whoever agree with it, and the only thing you can do about it is vote for the Greens or Winston Peters or the Labour Party. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. That's a minute 40 you've got spare, but taking away the 30 seconds you went over, you're about a minute ahead, so that's good. Clayton.
Well, the answer is obviously yes. Our manufacturing, all our exporters, apart from dairy, are being hollowed out because of high exchange rates. And Bill English comes before the select committee that I'm on 2 or 3 weeks ago and says there is no problem. And I stood before a manufacturing audience after that and asked them, I said, well, I'm a politician, lowest form of life, understand that. You are business people, you tell me, is life rosy? Are you gaining export contracts because you're competitive? No. Are you losing export contracts because you're too expensive because of a high exchange rate? Yes. So on one side of the political equation, you have the government who says there is no problem, no intervention necessary, she'll be right, it will come right in time. It may well come right in time, and that will be at a huge human cost, as we're seeing down here. Now, one of the problems Rio's got, of course, because, you know, exports aluminium, and all businesses have, is a volatile exchange rate where you cannot plan beyond 6 months. You can't even really hedge beyond 6 months because the exchange rate is moving up and down like topsy. As I said before, you change the Reserve Bank Act, it stays independent, but it must take account of things that affect New Zealand, not just price inflation, but the volatile exchange rate, in setting interest rates. It can't take account of that now, it chooses not to take account of that now. Unemployment, other economic issues that are centric and important to New Zealand as it determines what the interest rates are going to be. Because the truth is, we've had high interest rates for many years. That's attracted a hell of a lot of external money to go after those interest rates from overseas into the bank's coffers. The banks, of course, have leaped like topsy. People have bought homes like topsy, gone a bit nuts from time to time, and that's created the environment we have today. And And the other truth is that we've got to have some pro-growth tax. We have a view that there should be a capital gains tax. That may not be popular with some. It's not about being popular. But that provides, as in other countries, an incentive for people to move investments, not just simply into the box on the quarter acre or the third of an acre or it gets smaller every day, but actually invest money apart from property into productive investment, into business which create jobs. But anybody in the beehive who says the exchange rate isn't the #1 issue that is killing manufacturing and export businesses in this country is out to lunch.
Thank you, Craig. So, Peter Conway.
I think we need a board of the Reserve Bank that makes the decisions, not just one governor. We need to widen the policy targets agreement, which is something that these parties here support, and Winston is going to put up a bill over, and that has to include employment, living standards, exchange rate, and growth issues. At the moment, there's what's called macroprudential tools being developed for discussion, but they seem to be very keen on watering them down and then saying they'll hardly ever use them, if ever. And that includes things like loan-to-value ratios, and also core ratios for banks in terms of reserves that they have to hold. There's a lot of other things that could be done to address, for instance, housing policy that means you could rely less on interest rates as a way of trying to look at any housing bubbles. There's things that could be done around KiwiSaver that could be options instead of using interest rates. Clearly, New Zealand is a small country, 0.2% of global GDP. If we take on the US dollar, we're going to lose. But that does not mean that over time you could not make a real difference year after year by having a different settings around monetary policy. And also you could get rid of vast elements of the carry trade, the speculation. We also support a capital gains tax. And I want to just talk about another option on this that addresses, if you like, how you compete when you have got a higher dollar. This government is really going down what's called the low road. And that is the road where we see with these companies trying to attack work rights, where unions have managed to negotiate some sort of protections around flexibility. They're trying to drive down youth rates of pay. That is the low road. Look, for years we've heard that in the export sector, what does New Zealand need to do? Improve market access and increase the value of what we export. How often have you heard that? I've heard it for decades. The issue is implementation around that. And that means being highly productive, high performance work systems and working with workers and unions in that rather than trying to clobber them into a low income ghetto. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Just a reminder, the question is, do you think the exchange rate for the New Zealand dollar is a problem? If so, what can we do about it? Winston Peters.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it is the problem. For so many New Zealand businesses, it's the #1 problem, and that's why you've got thousands of farmers right now that are literally insolvent. At a time of great production prices and what have you, they're still in serious trouble. And a lot of businesses are the same, forestry businesses, timber companies and people like that there. But what you got here is the most amusing situation, you see. Our dollar is set by the Government Reserve Bank, who's only got one concern, #1 concern and only concern really, is what's happened to inflation. And have you ever seen a learner driver on a car? You know how they get brake, foot down, accelerator, bang on the brake, accelerator, bang on the brake, sort of bumping along like this? Well, that's how our economy goes. And frankly, it's crude, it's primitive, it's actually intellectually very, very lazy, but it suits a certain type of ideology that says that the market will sort it out. Absolute balderdash. It does not sort it out. What you need is a Reserve Bank governor empowered by Reserve Bank Act change to consider economic growth, export growth and employment growth, as well as inflation. He should consider all four. Why is China taking off? Because it controls its currency and half the rest of the world is screaming out about China artificially setting their dollar. Well, the Chinese not there with the biggest population in the world and with the longest civilization in the world because they're stupid. They're there because they're smart. And we should wake up and do a bit more, not of bringing over wholesale immigration, but how about adopting some of their ideas? And they're meant to be communists. We're meant to be the ones that are free thinkers, that think about alternative economic strategies. There they are, walking all over us with a dollar set to help themselves, and back home here we've got ministers and governments and politicians and commentators who don't want to do a thing. In short, the National Party has chosen to do nothing at all. And we can and will change this here, and the sooner the better. For at the end of the day, our great advantage is, in a country like ours, is that we've got seriously good rural products still. Maybe we haven't got mining, but you know, Australia had mining for 100 years, and in my youth, we were out competing Australia every day, every week, and every year. And we still could again, if we started believing in ourselves and got some realistic policies that acknowledge as a country that we're an export-dependent nation with tremendous primary products that can be added value to, and with the young people coming on with the right education, give us a great future as we go forward. And we better get it right, because some of you guys are going to be retiring shortly. Who's going to pay the super? You better get serious about it. And tell some of your National Party Blue Ridge Brigade neighbours down the road that they better start getting worried too. Because the use of farming too, if they don't wake up, the tit's going to run dry.
Comment for that from Materia today.
So yes, for all of the reasons that that has already been set out, we have it is a very serious concern. Russell in October put out a proposal for kind of public discussion, of which there was a great deal. That proposal included three options, or three different ways of dealing with this. One was capital gains tax, one was changes to the Reserve Bank Act as has been set out already, and the other one was quantitative easing, the printing money one, which of course got all the media. But these were ideas, some of which have been were lambasted. I remember talking about the capital gains tax in 2010 and getting nothing but criticism from everybody about that. Now it is widely accepted as being a necessary tool to shift investment to the particular sector. So these issues are still out for public discussion, but we are putting out ideas for how to deal with the exchange rate because of the impact on the export industry. Russell is also part of a manufacturing inquiry that is a joint inquiry of the Greens, of Labour, New Zealand First and the Mana parties. And that inquiry is open at the moment for submissions. Part of what we hope to achieve from that is not only ideas about protecting jobs in the manufacturing industry and how to develop and grow more jobs in that industry, but also around the impacts of the exchange rate and other financial tools on our exports and on the economy, so that we can develop a set of financial tools as well that we can agree on as a set of parties about the way forward. Again, that's part of our commitment to planning for what to do next and making sure that we try to balance out or even out these boom and bust cycles that Winston's been talking about as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I was saving my minute, and I was hoping Winston wouldn't pinch it, but for this question, because it's obviously the biggest industry in our city and it's the most important one in terms of jobs. We go every year and have a little tour of it. We have pep talks given to us by the CEO, but it's still hard to really know the reality of what's happening there. It seems from what we can pick up in discussions that it's nothing to do with us or anything we've done wrong. The Rio Tinto made huge investments in other companies, and those investments have collapsed, and that's why we're under so much pressure at the moment. When the Berlin Wall came down and Russia joined the free market, they dumped huge mountains of aluminium on the market, and we nearly went under at that time, and a lot of mid-sized smelters like ours did in fact have to close. We got round that by working out we'll never compete with mass production, we'll go for the highest niche market we can find. We'll produce the purest aluminium in the world, and we achieved that, 99.98% purity. And then we could supply cell phones and computers and aeroplane wings. Now, of course, to achieve that, we couldn't just get the old rough as guts sort of stuff from Gladstone. We had to go to Perth and actually buy it off BP, an opposition company, to achieve that sort of purity. but it was worth doing at the time. Now we're told that if the smelter closes, I haven't seen this, but there's a bond of $500 million and they're going to have to clean up and restore the smelter to pristine farmland. And so that will buy us time, that process. And during that time, representatives of council like Venture Southland, which is just a room like this with 25 people locked in it who do nothing else except work on economic development and what the future of Southland is going to be, are looking in depth, of course, at silica and have been for the last 10 years, looking at a whole range of options of what we can do, because we still produce, no matter what happens, the cheapest and most efficient electricity in New Zealand, and we will for the next 10,000 years, and we produce the third most efficient electricity in the world out of that tunnel going through. It's not because we're geniuses, it's because we got a lake 70 metres up in the air and it's only 10 miles from the coast, and you just drill a hole and the water pours through there forever and ever. And we will obviously be able to take advantage with alternatives. If they ship it north, because it's so efficient, it's going to completely undermine their sale of Mighty River Power. So they must be in quite a dilemma themselves. And I'm sure we'll be able to work out something in the future.
Thank you, Your Worship. Clayton Cosgrove.
Well, there won't be a hell of a lot to manage if Meridian's sold. That's the point. And the difficulty, and Tim alluded to it in the end of his address, that if this power goes on the market, there's one positive. It will drive the electricity. There'll be a lot of electricity and power on the market. It will drive the price down, the domestic price down. That, in some ways, obviously is a good thing for consumers. But with the government hell-bent on selling Meridian and Mighty River and Genesis and the rest, that also means the price of electricity goes down, the value of that company goes down, and they're determined to put it on the block come hell or high water. So you people lose twice. One, you lose the SOE that you and your grandparents bought and you own. And secondly, the price, if they get it away, will be far less than it should be if it was sold to maximise its value. So Tim's right, they've got a huge dilemma, a massive dilemma. But there won't be a hell of a lot to manage at all. If it's sold in part or whole, the people who will be managing it will be folks who get the dividends who will be in places like New York and London and Beijing and Shanghai. They'll be getting the benefit of it. The second part of the question was in respect of silica. My only comment on that is, all these good ideas should be looked at. I note that you've done a lot of work, Venture and others. They should be looked at. There are a huge amount of issues in terms of whether you can get those projects off the ground. But if it's a good idea, if it's potential for jobs, you've got to weigh up the cost benefit. Can we mitigate and remedy some of the negatives? But it should be studied. Some resource should be put into that study to see if it's economically viable, if we can get it up as a community, and if things like environmental issues and others can be mitigated. There is no harm in looking at these projects to see if they work.
Thank you, Clayton. And now a response.
Clearly the objective in this meeting is don't let TY close, don't let it happen. But if we move to what if it did? Well, first of all, no way if there's no job guarantees. So it's got to be about a job perspective. That's what I'm saying. Now, I've looked at what Rod Oram has said. Say there was a scenario where the government of the day decided that 15% of capacity could be put to better use, and leaving aside the issues that Clayton raised about privatisation of Meridian. Now, Rod Oram estimates that capacity would cost about $4.5 billion to create in terms of construction and operating costs. Now, I know that Transpower has to upgrade and about 30% is lost in transportation of that capacity. So even if it was around $3 billion that you would be talking about as a resource. Now, there's a principle in economics and environmental economics around trade-offs. And we saw an example of this in New Zealand when the Labour and Alliance government decided to ban native forest logging. on the west coast of the South Island. And they decided that to put that policy into place, they had to compensate the people who would lose. So they gave $120 million that day to the west coast, $92 million to the regional council and $7 million to each of the 4 local councils. Now, theoretically, if you applied that same model and looked at, say, a saving of around $3 billion, then I don't see what the issue is about compensating this region to the tune of at least half of that $1.5 billion as a fund that you would have as of right for what you have given up. Now, I think step one is that the electricity deal has to be secured so that it's not just a 3-year wind down that's being faced or constant attacks on the jobs there and whittling down in terms of the conditions. Step two is to look at other options. Step three includes supporting and voting for policies that will, as Winston said, promote manufacturing jobs and decent jobs in New Zealand. And I think only then we start to talk about what a transition looks like to a post-TY scenario. And I think, you know, I'd agree with what Clayton said. Don't trade 3,200 jobs for a collection of good ideas.
Thank you, Peter. New Zealand First managed the uncommitted monopody power production. Winston Peters.
Well, so what we're hearing is no TY, try silica. But the fact of the matter is that we've got to do everything we can to keep the original and the present situation going. That is, be saved. You've got the power, you've got the workers, and you've got to defend it. Now look, Meridian, if Meridian is sold, that's it. Unless we're prepared to say to those people buying, just this morning, whatever you pay for it is the most you'll get back from us when we take it back off you, because this is a resource owned by the New Zealand people that our grandfathers developed. And they made an investment for us, and these people haven't got the right, as we well know, because Peter Dunn, as you recall, campaigned at the last election that water was special. Then, as usual, did a somersault. He hasn't got a majority in Parliament if Peter Dunn was keeping his word. And I want to emphasise that. Look, as the good book says, he who sets his hand to the plough and looks backwards is not fit for the kingdom of heaven. So if you're going to set out to lose, you will. Now, I know politics is not heaven, but you got my point of view, haven't you?
One response to that last question now from Materia Ture from the Green Party.
I think Peter has set out kind of the complexity of what would have to happen. So, you know, there's no simple answer about what you could do. It's actually a very complicated question. The transmission lines would have to be significantly improved, and although I understand that Transpower has plans to do that, there's just no guarantees for what could happen. I come back a bit to Jeanette's proposal. One of the things she talked about in her article was not only a way of both keeping the smelter open and keeping jobs here and keeping aluminium being produced here, while using that whole system as a means to help with electricity generation and the management of electricity use ebbs and flows and the peaks and troughs. But she also talked about it as being a means to help with progressive pricing. We've long had a policy in the Greens of progressive pricing where a band of electricity, a certain amount of electricity is provided to every business and every household at a set low rate, so that people can get access to the power that they genuinely need for their daily activities at a low rate, and then it gets more expensive as you use more. It's a way of helping to reduce excessive use of electricity while making sure that we protect the needs of families, households and small businesses. And in some ways, the proposal she talked about would help to manage that. There'd be a little bit more in the system that would help that to happen. We could actually do it right now. It is possible to do it right now, except that there's no interest from the government to put out this proposal. But there are ways then we could help to make sure that those who have suffered from excessive electricity price rises, which is you, all of us, for a number of years now, will get some kind of payback for that. Because it has been extreme, and fuel poverty, especially in the south, is one of the major issues that families suffer from. That is part of the way that it could be used in a socially responsible way, but there are a huge number of issues around the transmission and what you would do with the rest of it, and I don't think it's just that, it's not that simple.
Bluff Road onto a boat overseas, get reproduced, just brought back here at a great profit. Why can't the small businessman have a crack at doing something with the overall product?
Well, it's on. Oh no, it's on. Well done. I think the trouble is we've gone for that option that I mentioned before of really high-grade aluminium, and we've gone for the top end of the market. And unfortunately, the boat builders like Stabycraft and that like to buy the cheap Chinese production because it's they don't need that high level of quality.
Yeah, and also I think, just to add, I think you're competing against massive economies of scale overseas. But again, let's look at any innovative ideas.
Yeah, I can't talk so much about aluminium, but your point is correct. You know, we're very weak and vulnerable, relying so much on dairy and so much on shipping commodities offshore. And it's obviously a story about how we can add value. And as I said earlier, that's not a new idea, it's an old idea. It's actually about implementation through successive political cycles and expanding the sorts of initiatives. And in order to do that, you need innovation, R&D, science, sustainable development principles, training, investment. You need all of that to come together. That's called economic management, and that's one of the main reasons we elect governments, is to get the right settings for that sort of economic management.
You know, TY Point produced the highest quality in the world. Is all of that? TY Point produces the highest quality of this sort of aluminium in the world, and it is twice as big as its next competitor. So they've done the right thing, I think. You want to start producing low quality stuff, then you're going to be out-competed by 42 aluminium smelters in China alone. So they've made the right decision. Now they should be defended, in my view.
I think Peter set out my view very clearly, actually, that it's about how you structure the system to build and support those businesses being here, those satellite businesses being here, and how you put some kind of social responsibility around these industries so that there is a network and a community of business that develops, and there's some kind of priority for those. How you do that, it does require the management, it requires engagement with all of those industry and investing in those businesses. There's a huge amount of innovation and new clean technologies and ideas that people want to, they are looking for investment to develop those products. They want to be able to stay in this country because they love it here, they want to build their businesses and have their families here. They want to move out beyond Auckland because they want to live and experience the whole of the country, not just, you know, apartment dwelling when you're looking at the back of somebody else's apartment. You know, this is the kind of life that can be built here if there is support for that kind of business, that kind of innovation. We've got everything we need, we just don't have the government will. I think government is a large part of this problem. Don't have the government will to invest in our own people and our own businesses. They're spending money elsewhere.
My question is, everyone seems to be focusing tonight on the issue of manufacturing and industry, or exports. But why don't we look at service and take a leaf from Kim.com in terms of the creation of Silicon Valley-based industries that need three things: cheap electricity, access to a good electrical source, and cheap rentals. Well, what does Southland have? So that's my question. Why don't we take a leaf out of Kim.com's book and start thinking ideas as opposed to manufacturing and export?
Thank you. We'll go to Materia first for this one.
I think that's part of the same thing. But, you know, and that's one part of the industry that, you know, we can develop is around the service industry and the IP development that can be sold to the world, and it's all about sort of intellectual capital. But we must never, ever neglect or reject the need for a strong manufacturing base in this country. You know, we need places, we need decent work, high quality, decently paid work with good conditions for families and for people who need jobs. They want to go someplace, they want to do some work, they want to be able to go home, live a decent, safe life. And so it doesn't preclude what you're talking about, but it has to be built into the process, because if it's not, then we're losing the capacity of our working people to have a decent life here, and I'm not prepared to accept that.
The fact is that when people demand wages, they're really talking about work, and there are various ways of getting work, and one of them is to do with manufacturing and things like exporting and
service office work.
But if you think Kim.com is the solution, you must be kidding yourself. No, you're talking about a guy that's stealing other people's property and putting it out there in the market. And he's not a genius. He's not a Zuckerberg. He's not Silicon Valley. He is taking other people's ideas and selling them, or making them better for sale. And that's why he was making $350,000 a week. Now, with respect, where in the world do you think any economy is going to tolerate that? Sooner or later, there's a price to pay for that.
We're not literally talking about Kim.com, we're talking about
sorry, my friend, but you raised him as a model.
Yes,
You'd be the first person anywhere in the Western world would do that.
Do you actually understand what he does, Winston?
Yeah, excuse me, mate, I understand because I've actually talked to the guy. I know exactly what he's done. I know exactly what he does, and I know his record, and I know his international record when he was in Germany. Now, I saw what he did to a whole lot of investors in Germany.
Sir, either you let him answer.
Sorry, Mr. Ludlow.
Thank you.
I mean, the good thing about Winston is he remembers meeting with Kim.com. Back to the questioner, I think you make a very good point. 70% of the economy is in the service sector, and also about 70% of what we make here is sold here. And sometimes people forget that there is still a little bit of old-fashioned economics, which is that if you treat people well and you pay good wages, and low-income people have got money, they spend it actually here rather than offshore. And so it's not always about exports. But if you look at the international literature and what's coming out of the OECD post the global financial crisis, there's a big swing back to manufacturing as a way of trying to build good incomes, as a way of trying to get the value out of that sort of transformation. Clearly in New Zealand, adding value to protein is a huge part of our future, as it has been of our past. And so that's going to be very important, and how you apply science to that is going to be a major part. The problem we've got are the distributional issues. I mean, when I last looked, there's about 14,500 dairy farmers. We happen to have 4.4 million people here. So, you know, there's an awful lot of wealth being accumulated by a small number of people. The problem we've got is around manufacturing is getting to scale, and that's where our proximity to Australia and that market and how we build agglomeration and scale in some of our manufacturing value added is going to be very important. But that doesn't take away from the good point you made, that there are many, many very important jobs in the services sector. And when we got unemployment down below 4% in New Zealand, and in 2005 had the lowest in the OECD, part of that was because there was a boom in the service sector.
Thanks, Peter. Clayton?
Yeah, I'd just say, look, I don't think it's a matter of manufacturing versus services, or manufacturing versus agriculture, or manufacturing versus IP. We need all of them. You know, we've got 175,000 people and counting unemployed. What would be a good incentive? I come back to what I said before, research and development tax credit. For many of those, I take it you might be in the IP space maybe, but certainly for that sector. What Peter was talking about, adding value through science, well, business needs a bit of an incentive to do that. It's what the Aussies have done for years and years and years. We put an R&D tax credit in, we lost government, it was gone by lunchtime. And so a bit of help, you know, a bit of help can actually assist with some of that innovation. But we're going to need services, agriculture. Those who say ag is a sunset industry, well, it's not. We're going to need services and agriculture and manufacturing lined up. I suppose the manufacturing acts as an anchor. And you've heard some of the comments today about, and look at Tiwai in some respects, the ancillary jobs, the contract jobs, 3,200 jobs which flow from that. If the government had got its act together with Hillside, you know, you had a whole facility to build things, fitters, turners, others. Though training kids would have been a wonderful thing to do there in apprenticeships, they spin off. into other businesses who need skilled people, blah, 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 blah. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But what it requires is a decision by government to say, we're going to get stuck in. We're going to do something. We're not just going to have a 120-point plan and strategies and actions and blah, 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 blah. We're actually going to say we're going to back New Zealand. We're going to be hands-on. Not in an old-fashioned Muldoonist interventionist type of way, but we're actually going to, we're not going to sit on the sidelines. We're going to take some damn action and back our own people and our own business people. But if you ask Bill English, pop on the TV and watch Parliament, he said, everything's okay. In fact, what he says is, the latest alibi, is look, it's not as bad as overseas. So that's as good as it gets. It's not as bad as Greece or Portugal or Ireland, so you folks should all feel good about yourselves, because that's the benchmark.
Thank you, Clayton.
I think the essence of the question was that we've got to be more high-tech and we've got to be innovative and we've got to go for sort of modern-day solutions. But, and I think, you know, I hope everyone in this room agrees with that. But you can get a lot of resistance, whether it's Galileo or Newton or whether it's my Auckland Island Pigs project. You'd be surprised when you come up with new industries. I mean, at the moment we're looking at a Auckland to Bluff yacht race, and it's 9,000 jobs in the marine industry in this country. It turns over $1.7 billion, 700 million of that is export earnings. And I thought people would really embrace such an innovative idea, but hell, you get into a lot of trouble in this country when you try and do things that are different or new or challenge people's traditional beliefs. And, you know, I think we've got to be honest about that situation as well. And so that's why I think still education is so important, and just widening people's horizons and opening them up to new opportunities and new industries.
We have time for one final question.
Good evening. We talk about exports from New Zealand. At this point in time, one of the biggest exports is banking, going to Australia. Since New Zealand has gone into a decline, the banks have made the biggest record profit ever made. What would this panel do to stop this profit and put it back into the rural economy, instead of putting it into the rich bankers in Australia?
Oh gosh, I'm feeling crook already. I had to do the Southland Heroes Awards the other day, and we got some great heroes. I mean, people who ran around the Himalayan mountains to raise money for MS people, who went to Africa and opened orphanages. And all I had to do was thank the sponsor, and I gave this really passionate thank you on behalf of all New Zealanders for the B&Z. It's bloody Kiwi Bank sponsored it. But you're right. And I think we've done quite well in that area with SBS, credit unions, and of course our lotto shop out of Bluff, which was really a Kiwi bank in disguise. And I think there is a recognition of what you're saying as being correct, and I think there'll be more patriotism and national fervour develop over the next 10 years, hopefully.
Thank you, Worship. Clayton?
Well, that's one of the reasons we set up Kiwi Bank. And because all our banks, apart from Kiwi Bank, apart from the building societies and a couple of others, are all owned overseas, all Aussie banks. I think the Governor of the Reserve Bank and the Reserve Bank's got a role in terms of some of the prudential tools that it's got at its disposal, loan-to-value ratios and other things. It's difficult to stop profits going overseas by some. I suppose what I'd say to you is this. The government's proposing exactly the same thing with assets. Your airline, your coal company, Genesis, Mighty River and Meridian. They're proposing that they flog most of that off, and those dividends, which now go back into your community, the cheques will be cashed in New York, London and other places. Now, how dumb is that? How stupid is that? So the banks provide a good example, I suspect, of where the money goes, as you say, offshore. If you're smart in government, you wouldn't start writing cheques for people offshore to cash.
Reserve Bank dug in reasonably well when the Aussie banks wanted to take a lot of the back office stuff offshore and making sure they kept a footprint here, but there's no doubt you're right about all the profits going offshore. And one of the kind of economic factors that people look at in terms of the health of a country is the current account deficit. That's made up of three balances. One's around goods, one's around services, and the other's around investment. Even when we're doing really well on goods and services, every time the investment income deficit just massively wipes it out. And that's basically because so much of New Zealand is owned offshore that even when times are good, in fact especially when times are good, the capital repayments and the profits go offshore, and our current account deficit, even when the economy is strong, actually gets worse. So part of it is also tied up in housing policy, because that has driven a lot of the bank profit. And you know, in New Zealand, the average ratio between debt and household disposable income in 1990 was 60%. And by 2006 it was over 160%. So in other words, people, you know, there was a house price bubble, people ended up carrying a lot of debt, and meanwhile bank profits were huge, and we had a regime where a lot of it went offshore. So Kiwi Bank was one response, some of the controls from the Reserve Bank are others, but actually a lot of it is about the broader economic policies and that sort of thing. Unless we're going to nationalise all of them, it's pretty hard to turn that around. It's a tough one. It's a tough question you've asked in terms of being able to come up with very tangible, concrete answers that could be implemented straight away.
Thank you, Peter. Winston.
Look, when the BNZ was sold by the national government in October of 1993, it then had 6 out of 10 New Zealand customers was with the BNZ. They sold it off, you recall, for really a bargain sale price. And since that time, now the 4 Aussie banks have made more profit in this country than any other country in which any other banks have been engaged worldwide. They are making the most profits during, of all time, the global financial crisis. They're making more profits here out of us than they are making in Australia in comparative terms. That's really serious. So it's like a giant vacuum cleaner sucking out of our economy, and we'll never get on top of our problems until our savings, which we at least have started doing now, puts us in a position to free ourselves up from our almost total dependence on foreign money. Pretty fundamental. The second thing is, you know, little things like this. Why is the government account with an Aussie bank called Westpac? Why isn't it with the BNZ, for goodness sake? And we need to back the BNZ. It's the best option we've got now, and bit by bit get a far greater control of our banking system. And Kerry back a minute, Kerry back. Well, that's the big one. That's the point. I'll tell you this. Well, my party's with Kerry Bank, but I was a person who had my shares taken off me in the BNZ compulsorily and sold to the National Australia Bank. And as a consequence, I kept my account there just as a bloody mindedness to let them know that I was never going to be kicked out of my own country. And one day, I thought one day, before I'm finished in politics, I hope we take the BNZ back.
Thank you, Winston. And the other one, I think your worship's feeling a little bit better about which bank is being identified now. Tanya.
Sorry, we keep laughing up here. It's because these lovely girls from James Hargis keep waving at Winston. He's very famous. They're waving at Winston. Yes, so we've long campaigned for government to have Kiwi Bank as the preferred bank. I thought they were banking with Westpac, aren't they, at the moment? So you know, if government isn't committing to one of New Zealand's only banks, you know, big enough banks to be able to handle those accounts, then you know, of course we're in a difficult situation. Banks have, I think it's something like $14 billion in the last 4 or 5 years that banks have taken out of the New Zealand economy and shipped overseas. I mean, we just cannot afford for this to continue. This is an issue that has been raised between my other co-leader Russell Norman and the governor of the Reserve Bank, where there's been some argument between them about the extent to which banks are stripping money, overseas banks are stripping money out of the New Zealand economy. And we've argued strongly for the Reserve Bank governor to look at encouraging more competitive behaviour with the banks so that New Zealand banks get a better chance. One of the things, of course, is as consumers, us as ordinary New Zealanders. Banking with these alternative New Zealand-owned banks, Kiwi Bank, Southland Banking Society here, you know, there's TSB, there's lots and lots of options for us. Credit unions are getting bigger and bigger as well in New Zealand, which is good. But this is about us investing in our own people, us investing in our own services, us investing in our own businesses. It's a commitment we make as well. And when we make it, then we can demand that government does the same, that local government does the same, and all our agencies do the same.